Hi there, welcome back to the archives. So I'm back to do, I just already said, I'm back to do a book share. I saw, what's that guy's name? One of these American guys, um, is it maybe Steve Bannon? Somebody was like, they're just getting more radicaler. And I just feel like we could stand to get even more radicaler. Um, so I wanted to just do another book share today. I'm going to share, I think I'm going to share three and then I'll come back and do three more because I have six I wanted to share. So I'll do three first. The first one, because I've been sharing a lot of history in the Women, Queens, and Intellectuals series that I'm learning on the great courses, right? And so far, a majority of them have been European women. A good majority have been European women. We've also had um, who's a Chinese woman. We've had two Japanese women. We've had some Iranian women, North African women. In future episodes, I still have to get through some more. We're going to Mongolia and some other places, but none, um, nothing in terms of African women in the Black African sub-Saharan women, and nothing in terms of indigenous folks in Turtle Island or this side of the world. Um, and definitely nothing about, they have nothing about Black American women either, right? Just, there's no Black women in the series. And so today I wanted to talk about some of my favorite other Black writers, including um, one of my favorite Aquarius girls. So I'm going to start with Paula Giddings. When and Where I Enter: The Impact of Black Women on Race and Sex in America. So this is Paula Giddings. The art is really beautiful. So this comes from a quote, the title comes from a quote from Anna Julia Cooper, um, a quote from her 1892 book that was called A Voice from the South. So 1892, um, Anna Julia Cooper was quoted, "Only the Black woman can say when and where I enter, in the quiet, undisputed dignity of my womanhood, then and there the whole Negro race will enter with me." So this, I understand this idea that liberation can't just come from like men alone, and not only that, but it's typically has always been um, Black women that are at the forefront. Um, but then the recognition usually goes to Black men, right? We both need each other, but who tends to be get left? Who tends to get left out, right? This series that I'm doing, I don't see Amina in there. Um, I don't see Ya Santwa in there. I don't see Nzinga in there. They never talked about Cleopatra. Like they just right. So, um, anyways, when and where I enter: the impacts of Black women on race and sex in America. So this one, this copy, this is actually before I started my PhD and I was leaving the health clinic I was working at. My boss at the time, Notisha, Dr. Notisha Nasakoy, gave me like a, a bunch of her hand-me-down books that she was looking to get rid of, and so this is one of the books that Notisha gave me. Um, when and Where I Enter. And so it says, American Black women have a history of their own. They have served as a linchpin between the two most important social reform movements of the last 100 years: Black rights and women's rights. But their struggle is also distinct, with its own concerns, values, and ambitions. When and Where I Enter fully unfolds that history for the first time. drawing on speeches, diaries, letters, and other original sources. Paula Giddings movingly describes how Black women transcended the double discrimination of sexism and racism, from the landing of the first enslaved in the 17th century to the present. Giddings gives a fascinating account of the important Black women's club movement, and details the deep and painful conflicts with white feminists and Black male political leaders. Here too are unforgettable portraits of superb Black women such as the anti-lynching journalist Ida B. Wells, the Roosevelt-era Black brain truster Mary McLeod Bethune, and Mississippi's angriest woman, Fannie Lou Hamer. The result is a brilliant, fresh, and compelling picture of American social history seen through the eyes of Black women who have lived it with courage, determination, and love. Oh, you be careful. Um, so yes, Paula Giddings. I want to read the beginnings of the preface. A history of our own. On the wall of my mother's bedroom is a large portrait of my great grandmother. A woman who peers out of the oval frame is fair-skinned with broad features. Her neck is adorned with the high Victorian collar that was popular in the 19th century. My great-grandmother's expression is serene, tranquil, perhaps even defiantly so, for if you look closely, there is an almost imperceptible rim of determination that circles her otherwise soft, luminous eyes. Her mother had been enslaved, the daughter of a Virginia master who had been taught the rudiments of education, fine embroidery, and music, as well as the harsher lessons of being Black and a woman in America. All of these things and the hopes they inspired were passed down to my great grandmother, who in turn kept them alive for succeeding generations. But the story behind those eyes remained largely untold. That is why, for a Black woman to write about Black women is at once personal and an objective undertaking. It is personal because the women whose blood runs through my veins breathe amidst the statistics. They struggled north during the Great Black Migration, endured separations, were domestics and school teachers, became pillars of their communities, and remained ordinary folk. I've been thinking a lot about this idea of just ordinary folk, right? The women, queens, and intellectuals, before it gets into it, it talks about how, like, these are not the stories of ordinary folks, right? It was like millions of women were hardworking. My bad. They lived their lives, and no one really documented or knew their stories. And they are just as valuable, right? You probably have not no shade to all of these women that I'm talking about, in terms of, but like to assume that only noble women, only the queens, only the upper classes were talented artists or intellectuals. I mean, maybe, but no, there's probably a lot of ordinary women who just were not, whose stories were just not told. Writing such a book is also an objective enterprise because one must put such experiences into historical perspective, find in them a rational meaning so that the forces that shape our own lives may be understood. When and where I enter attempts to strike a balance between the subjective and the objective. Although it is a product of extensive research, it is not without a point of view or a sense of mission, a mission to tell a story largely untold. For despite the range and significance of our history, we have been perceived as token women in Black texts and as token Blacks in feminist ones. Most of the books that focus on Afro-American women are of the contributions type, the achievement of Black women who, despite double discrimination and oppression, were able to duplicate the feats of Black men and white women. What I learned by reading these texts was important and illuminating, but it wasn't enough, for Black women have a history of their own, one which reflects their distinct concerns, values, and the role they have played as both Afro-Americans and women. And their unique status has an impact on both racial and feminist values. So I set out to write a narrative history of Black women, tracing their concerns and what they did about them, from the 17th century to the contemporary period. It is a thematic and approach using a broad canvas to illustrate the nature and meaning of the Black woman's experience. And so, she talks about how several themes emerged. One of them, closely exposed to the experience of Black women, is a relationship between sexism and racism, right? Because both are motivated by similar economic, social, and psychological forces. It is only logical that those who sought to undermine Blacks were also the most virulent anti-feminists. The means of oppression differed across race and sex lines, but the wellspring of that oppression was the same. Black women understood this dynamic. White women, by and large, did not. White feminists often acquiesced to racist ideology, undermining their own cause in doing so. For just as there is a relationship between racism and sexism, there is also a connection between the advance of Blacks and that of women. The greatest gains made by women have come in the wake of the strident Black demands for their rights. So, so basically, this is a book I definitely would recommend if you are trying to understand right now, especially if you want to understand what's going on right now in the United States as there's an attack on Black women. This is definitely a book you want to take a look at. When and Where I Enter: The Impact of Black Women on Race and Sex in America by Paula Giddings. This was published 1984. 1984. So it's a year older than I am. I'm an 85 baby. This was published in 1984. So that's 41 years. So I just wanted to leave this one with you. Paula Giddings, When and Where I Enter. I'm going to end this one here, and then I'll do Angela Davis on her own. Okay, so until next time, in solidarity.